Week 8 of the 2020 college football season is over, and we are headed into Week 9 of this college football season. And Week 8 definitely was the most important week of this season up until this point. We saw all 14 of the Big Ten teams in that conference coming back, so that's great to see. We saw Ohio State, Wisconsin, Michigan, Penn State, all of those teams were back this week in action, which once again is great to see. And it's not going to be too long in a couple of weeks when the Pac-12 comes back as well. So that means all of our Power 5 teams will be playing college football, and things are going to look a little more like normal at that point. So once again, it's great to see the Big 12 coming back, and so they're going to be fully entered into our Week 9 rankings here today. And just so you guys all know as well, there was a little bit of confusion about this previously. This is not the AP poll or the coaches poll for this week. These are my personal rankings. And with that cleared up, let's look at your 1 through 7. This week at number 1, I've got Clemson, and that's not going to be much of a change from last week. I had them at 1 in Week 8 as well. They beat Syracuse 47-21. That game was actually pretty close for a little while there. We saw Syracuse kind of hang around in there, especially towards the end of the first half, but Clemson pulled away and had a big one in the end, 47-21. They're sitting at 6-0 and definitely looking like the best team in the country right now. You also got Alabama at 2. They're sitting at number 2 this week. They beat Tennessee 48-17. Great win there for the Crimson Tide. Obviously, the Vols have not been near as good as expected this season, so that's a big disappointment for them. But still, Alabama's playing really well right now, so they're going to be our number 2 this week. They're 5-0. Ohio State's moving up to number 3 after their win against Nebraska in week number 8. They beat them 52-17, and that game was actually pretty scary in the first half for the Buckeyes. We saw a really close matchup between both of those teams. And then in the second half, Ohio State completely just looked exactly like how we expected them to look all game long. They got a big win there, 52-17 over the Huskers. They're 1-0. 4 is going to be Georgia. They had a bye week this week, but they're going to be swapping spots with Ohio State because Ohio State's undefeated, Georgia's not, and Georgia did not look very good against Alabama. So I think Ohio State would probably compete a little bit better with the Crimson Tide after watching Ohio State last week. So I've got them at number 3. Notre Dame's going to be number 5. They beat Pittsburgh big, 45-3. Big win there for the Fighting Irish. Obviously, Pitt has not been as good this season as many expected them to be, including myself. 45-3 is a huge win there for Notre Dame. They're 5-0. Oklahoma State's also undefeated at 4-0. They had a big win, probably their best win of the season, against Iowa State, 24-21. And Iowa State was ranked last week, so that's Oklahoma State's best win up until this point. And that just kind of, it makes me a little more convinced that Oklahoma State is for real. That's a big win there for the Cowboys. 7 is going to be Texas A&M. They had a bye this week, but they're moving up 1 as Penn State has moved out of our top 7. They're 3-1. Looking at your 8 through 14, Florida also had a bye this week, but they're moving up 1 because Penn State, I actually had them really high in my Week 8 rankings. I think I had Penn State at 6. Either 6 or 7, so they're moving way down this week after their loss to Indiana. But Florida's going to be at number 8. They're 2-1 right now, and they're moving up 1. Wisconsin's our number 9, and they beat up Illinois big time, 45-7. And with Jack Cohn not being at quarterback, that was a very surprising performance there by Wisconsin. I did not expect them to get as big of a win as they did. But bad news out of Wisconsin right now, their quarterback Mertz, it looks like he got tested for COVID, and it was positive. And I think if he gets tested positive for the second time in a couple of days, that means he's going to be out for 3 whole weeks. The Big Ten policy on COVID, in my opinion, is way too exaggerated. I think if you get tested positive for COVID, you should be out maybe for a week to 2 weeks. But for the Big Ten, it's 3 weeks. So if Mertz does get tested positive, that means Wisconsin is stuck with their 3rd-string quarterback for the next 3 weeks. That is not going to be good for the Badgers, especially moving forward. So you got to hope that he does not test positive for the second time in a row. So just something to note there. But they're going to be number 9 this week nonetheless. They're 1-0. Cincinnati's going to be number 10, and they had a huge win against SMU last week. 42-13 was their final score there. SMU looking like a good team before that matchup. That's a huge win for the Bearcats. They're 4-0. BYU is going to be number 11, and BYU has been a huge surprise team so far this season. They beat Texas State 52-14. And they still looked like a great team, 6-0. Honestly, I consider putting them ahead of Cincinnati. I mean, Cincinnati's a good team, but BYU has been a little more convincing for me so far. 12 is going to be Miami. They beat Virginia 19-14. And then they're also 5-1, so they were looking pretty good. However, I think after a close win to a team like Virginia, it is a little bit concerning. So I think BYU should be in front of Miami for this week at least. Michigan's moving up 5 after their win against Minnesota. 49-24 was the final score there. Great performance by the Wolverines. They looked great in that game. Pretty much the best that they have in a couple of years. So, yeah, Michigan's moving up way up into number 13 for this week. They're 1-0. Oregon has not played a game yet. They moved down 2 because I decided to put, I think it was Michigan and Cincinnati in front of them. So Oregon's going to be number 14 this week. Looking at 15 through 21, North Carolina, and they had a big win against NC State, 48-21. However, I just could not move them any further up. I mean, I could have put them in front of Oregon, but I just decided not to for this week until they get another win. Yeah, North Carolina looked really good last week against NC State. 48-21 was your final score there. Kansas State's at number 16. They beat Kansas 55-14. Kansas has really had a great showing ever since their first loss a couple of weeks ago, and they're moving up 4 this week after starting 4-1. Indiana moves way into number 17 in my rankings this week, and this has just been a really weird year as far as rankings go. I mean, we've seen teams drop over 10. We've seen teams enter in at really high positions, and this is a perfect example of that. I just think Indiana is better than USC, Iowa State, Coastal Carolina, all of those teams. I just think Indiana, after getting a really good win against Penn State, I just think Indiana should be put in at a pretty high position. So that's why they're at number 17 this week. They're 1-0 after a huge win against the Penn State Nittany Lions, which Penn State will be our 18 for this week. And they're going to be right behind the Hoosiers for this week. They moved down 12. I actually had Penn State at 6 last week, and that may sound crazy now, but I mean, I thought Penn State was looking great heading into this season. I thought they were going to be a huge competitor to Ohio State, which they still can be. But after starting off the season 0-1 with a loss to Indiana, that is not a good sign for things to come for the Nittany Lions especially. I mean, once again, there could be a huge overreaction saying Penn State is not a national contender anymore. But after a loss like that, and you've only got a certain amount of games this season, yeah, that's not a very good sight for Penn State right now. 19 is going to be USC. They've not played a game yet, but they're moving up 4 this week up until 19. Iowa State's going to be 20. They lost to Oklahoma State 21-24. They're moving down 4 this week, and they're 3-2. Coastal Carolina's coming in at 21, and they beat Georgia Southern 28-14. Big win for Coastal Carolina. Honestly, I wasn't sure how they're going to handle the pressure of being a ranked team. Obviously, I don't think they've ever been ranked, and if they have, it's been a really long time since we've seen them be ranked. So it was going to be interesting to see how they would handle that, but they played really well. Got a good win there. They're 5-0, and they moved up 3 in the rankings this week. Looking at 22 through 25, we got Oklahoma coming back into the rankings at 22 this week. And I considered leaving them out for another week, but they're 3-2, which I think is a good enough record to be ranked right now. And they beat TCU very convincingly. 33-14 was their final score there. And TCU is no Kansas. I mean, TCU is not a bad team at all. So for Oklahoma to beat them like that, it was pretty impressive. So I think Oklahoma should deserve another spot in the rankings and another chance to be brought back in. Marshall's going to come in at 23, and the AP polls got Marshall in at a much higher position. I'm not convinced by Marshall yet. I mean, they had a close game to Florida Atlantic, 20-9, and they've had several close games so far this season. So I just don't think, Marshall's a good team for sure. I just don't think that they're a top 20 team quite yet. But yeah, they're coming into the rankings this week at 23. They're 5-0, and if they can get another win, I think that I'll probably put Marshall into the top 20 for next week. Auburn is going to be number 24. They're moving up 1 after their win to Ole Miss. And really, that was just a sloppy win. I think Auburn definitely needs to play much better if they're going to be a team that should be top 20. But they're 3-2, and they did get a win last week, and a win's a win. 25 is going to be Army. They're coming in at 6-1. I think Army's pretty underrated the more I think about it. I mean, they're 6-1 right now. They do have 1 loss, but they've been having some pretty convincing wins. And so I think Army definitely should be deserving a little more respect, but I'm going to put them at 25 for this week after their win against Mercer 49-3. First 5 out for this week. SMU is coming in at 26, and I honestly consider putting in SMU at 24-25, but I think for this week, after a blowout loss like they had against Cincinnati, I don't think that they deserve a ranking right now. So they're going to be at 26. Boise State's going to be 27, Memphis 28, Liberty 29, then Minnesota will be 30. As for the teams that dropped out this week, Minnesota dropped out. They were 17 last week. Virginia Tech also dropped at 19. SMU was 20, and then NC State was 22. That being said, that wraps up my rankings for Week 9. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on these rankings. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. I'll try to get back to as many of your guys' responses as possible. But then again, thanks again for watching. If you enjoyed this, slap a like on it. Subscribe as well if you aren't yet. It really helps out the channel, and I'd really appreciate that. But as always, thanks again for watching. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central, and I'll catch you all in the next one.